All right. Okay, so this is the Advanced Persistent Threat presentation that I've been doing. I do different variations on it depending on the audience. So this is my more of my general security thing. I just did it for, it was originally created for senior executives, but since we're a little bit more of a technical audience, I make it a little bit more technical. So let me make sure I've got it. Okay, so these are my own views. As you will see in the, as I go through my biography, I belong to a bunch of different organizations. I have an employer. These are the views and opinions of mine, not any organization I work with. So if I say something silly, it's all my fault. So who am I? Cyber investigations team leader. I'm actually changing jobs. I was a cyber investigations team leader for a defense contractor, and very shortly I will be I'm starting a new role, a leadership position with a financial institution, which I can't name yet because I haven't started with them yet, and I don't know what their rules of engagement are as far as identifying who they are. So, I'm also an instructor for the SANS Institute. I teach one of the digital forensics courses. I've been teaching the 408 course, which is the Windows forensics course. I blog at A Fistful of Dongles, as we talked about before. Board member on CDFS, IEEE senior member, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I got certifications, professional memberships, yada, yada, yada. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to send me an invite, go for it. I'm always willing to connect with people. You can find me on Twitter at AFODblog, which is the account for the blog account. So, what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about who is APT, not what, as we will discuss, why you should care, and what you can do about it. So, this is the credit where credit's due slide, and there's also an ulterior motive on this. My APT Triad, as I call them. The first one is Richard Bejtlich. He started with the Air Force, went to GE, built their incident response function out there. Now he's the CSO over at Remediate. Rob Lee, who was my boss at SANS, also Air Force, also Remediate, and now at SANS. And then Mike Kloppert, who I think descended from a fiery chariot from the sky and now works at a major defense contractor defending them. The reason why I like to point this out is I call myself as belonging to the Air Force school of thought when it comes to APT, and actually those are the folks where the term originated with, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So I'm going to talk about descriptions of APT, and we're also going to talk about a definition of it. The descriptions are the ones I really like the most, especially this Matt Unley one from SourceBear, which is APT, there are people smarter than you, they have more resources than you, and they're coming for you. Good luck with that. And as Rob has taught us, and we'll hit this a couple times in the presentation, APT is a who and not a what. So who is it? Admit it, you thought I was going to say China, right? It's nation-state actors. This isn't anything new. Nation-state actors have been involved in cyber espionage. You know, it's the world's second oldest profession, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about advanced persistent threat. The origination of the term, as best as I can push it back from talking to my peers, is about 2006 or so. The Air Force started using this terminology. And the reason they used the advanced persistent threat terminology was, in some circumstances, when they need to talk about certain things in a non-classified environment, they have to use sort of a vague terminology. And actually, it's the first time I heard it in a similar circumstance. When you are working in an intelligence environment or a situation where you're dealing with classified information, one of the things that you'll find is the military and even law enforcement to a certain extent, they like to assign names to certain threat actors in certain situations. So if you have, let's say you're working an investigation and you're working on an investigation and it's the Pakistani intelligence that you're worried about, well, you'll assign, this particular threat actor a particular name, maybe something like, Platinum Blue, which is something I just made up. But you'll hear actually, if you do some searching on APT, you'll see some of the public information. Some of these terms have actually leaked their way out into the media. So if you're going to go talk to folks in a non-classified environment, you really can't use those terms, so you want to come up with something a little bit more generic. So advanced persistent threat was used a lot when, of course, dealing with a certain nation state, which we'll talk about here shortly, but it was sort of a vague term to begin with, and as we'll talk about in the presentation, it hasn't gotten any more specific. We've taken a term that was intentionally vague, and now we have vendors and lots of other folks using it, and as you might expect, It didn't get any more specific. But because nation-state actors are involved in intelligence collection, they are going to use anything that they have available to them to collect the intelligence. So the best example, or one of the good examples I like to use, is the Iranians and the Israelis. You have two nation-states that are going after each other, basically, or they're in conflict with each other. And both of those intelligence organizations have been tasked by their governments to go collect intelligence. So they're going to use any means they have available to them. They're going to use human intelligence, physical spies, signals intelligence, any sort of information they can intercept through communications. And of course, they're going to use cyber. If you're the intelligence chief of the Israeli military, of course you're going to use that sort of methodology to grab information, to answer questions about a nation's capabilities, their methods, and their intentions. So let's say you're the Israeli, person in charge of the intelligence. Your bosses are coming to you and asking you questions about what are the Iranians doing with their nuclear program. If they do get a nuclear weapon, and gosh, we'd sort of like to know when they were going to get that, would they use it? How would they use it? Very important information that these folks have been tasked to collect. So, of course, they're going to go out and they're going to knock over computers and use spies to collect the information. The counterpart on the other side, the Iranian intelligence head, is getting the same questions from his government. Hey, what do the Israelis have for nuclear weapons? Under what circumstances will they use it? What do they know about us? Under what circumstances will they attack us? This is normal stuff. So this isn't anything new. Using high tech to collect intelligence is anything new. Of course, you're going to use that. Now, here's one of the reasons why we've seen so much emphasis on China, because China and other nations they've gone beyond just talking about methods, intentions, normal things you would do with nation-state espionage. Now they've gone into commercial data. I won't read this whole quote, but this came from the chairman of the House of Representatives Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence last fall, where they held hearings on this, and they really hit the China issue pretty hard. And they said China's economic espionage has reached an intolerable level. They believe that the United States and our allies in Europe and Asia have an obligation to confront Beijing and demand they put a stop to this piracy. That's the difference. That's one of the reasons why there's so much emphasis on China. There was a recent report put out that also named Russia. So, and it's not just these two doing economic espionage, but these folks, they're doing so much and they're so good at it, they're starting to get named. And you're starting to see the U.S. government, as you've seen here, name names. So, one point, and I'm already seeing this in the chat room, I will use cyber. I understand God kills a kitten every time I do that, but I don't fight the language. I used to not use the term a lot, and now I've basically caved in and now I use the language, especially because I'm talking to senior executives and I want to be able to speak clearly. So, yes, I use the term cyber. I apologize. There will be plenty of dead kittens at the end of this presentation. So, my executive summary. When I want to talk to a senior executive or I want to talk to someone and I want to give them sort of a pithy definition of what it is, APT is a nation-state or similar adversary who uses relentless cyber espionage to steal your data. Generally, it's nation-states. There's a bunch of different definitions, and we'll talk about the definition that I tend to use, and that's the Bejtlich definition. There's all sorts of different definitions of APT out there, and many of them are reasonable. There isn't one definition. I don't want anyone to think there's just one definition and there's only one right way, because as we talked about before, the term was pretty vague to begin with, and in some ways it causes more trouble than it helps us. But when I talk about a similar adversary, I put a little bit of squish into this because we're talking about nation-state intelligence functions. So that requires a lot of resources. That requires a lot of organizational history and training. I mean, building up that sort of intelligence capability is generally something outside the scope of even sophisticated organized crime. When I talk about similar adversary, you could have organizations like NATO, the UN, they're not necessarily nation states. They could constitute their own intelligence capability that would be comparable to a nation state. You could theoretically have an organized crime group doing the same thing, but it would probably be because a nation state is behind them. So I throw a little squish in. The definition that I like to use as the basic definition, is Richard Bejtlich's definition. He's put it out in a couple different articles. It's on his blog post. I've got the link there if you want to go directly to the source. He has a more broad definition of this. I just take the bullet points. Advanced means the adversary can operate a full spectrum of computer intrusion. Here's the thing that makes me nuts about the APT, the bad APT definitions. They're so malware focused that they will tell you that if an organization is compromised, and if the organization is compromised in a very simple manner, that gosh, it can't possibly be a nation state. Nation states will do whatever they need to get the information that they have been tasked with collecting. So sometimes they will use advanced techniques. Sometimes they will send their best people at you. Sometimes they will use advanced malware. But sometimes they don't have to do that. If they can send the interns after you and take your stuff, why would they use their limited resources? Why would they use their best people to go after you if they can just send, you know, the C team? So just because you got knocked over, and just because the methods that were used were basic, doesn't mean it was an advanced actor. It just may mean that your defenses suck so bad they didn't have to use the best people to go after you. Persistent is what we talked about. Once a nation state's been tasked at taking your stuff, they're not going to stop. This is very serious. This is geopolitical. These are folks that have a very serious job, and that's to collect intelligence. Once they've been tasked to take your stuff, they're going to keep coming at you. Once you've been targeted by a nation state, it's probably going to be there for a very long time. So threat means the adversary is not a mindless piece of code. We're not talking about worms. We're not talking about botnets. This is fingers at the keyboard. These are folks that are organized. They are well-funded, they are very professional, and they have been tasked to go after you. So what APT is not? It's not malware. This is where you see, a lot of the times you'll see this with the vendors. They can use very advanced malware. They'll put together their custom tools. They're like any hacker. They like their tools. Sometimes they'll use off-the-shelf stuff if it works for them. Sometimes they'll use their own custom stuff. They can put together some really great stuff. It's not how. And this is another Bejtlich tweet I really like. And this, you'll see, cybercriminals increasing success at easily and covertly infiltrating target informations via APTs. If you see a definition or you see a vendor explanation and it's really more of the how for an APT, they probably don't know what they're talking about. It's a who. It's a nation state going after you. China gets a lot of attention. Sometimes it's China. But it's not always China. Like I said, there's plenty of nation states doing this. APT is the who. It's not Stuxnet. Actually, we'll go back. It's not Stuxnet. This is the biggest, one of the biggest misconceptions. And originally when Stuxnet came out, I'm thinking, APT, nation state, of course. And then I read a tweet or a blog post by Mike Klopper where it's like, no, if you call Stuxnet APT, you have to redefine APT. What was Stuxnet's purpose? Stuxnet's purpose, and it probably was nation state behind it, probably the Israelis. Don't know that. We may never know. But Stuxnet's purpose wasn't cyber espionage. Stuxnet's purpose was to get inside a network and actually not take information, but actually do damage by the systems that controlled the centrifuge for the Iranian, or the centrifuges for the Iranian nuclear program. So there may very well have been, a quote-unquote APT component to that, where whatever nation state that the targeting, got in there and used as much cyber espionage techniques as it can to figure out the environment, for the scouting and that sort of thing. So, it was probably Israelis, and I would classify the Israelis as an APT for the Iranians and vice versa. But Stuxnet in its own is not an APT. The tool is not APT. It's the who. So who are the targets? Anyone who has anything a nation and state intelligence gathering service has been tasked to collect. Like we talked about before, in many circumstances, it's nation states intelligence services are tasked to collect, information that you would think on a geopolitical scale. What are this nation's military capabilities? What are their intentions toward us? What do they know about us? Basic statecraft that you would think before, that's as old as, espionage itself. Like we talked about before, now we have nation states involved in economic espionage. Now we have nation states that are stealing information, nothing really to do to beef up their military. Of course, they're doing that, but things to build up their economic base, things so that they compete with other nation states by taking information and saving their economies quite a bit of time in research and development. It's also important to understand that some nation states and their businesses are the same thing. Some nation states, if you have a one-party government, the private sector is probably the government. Like Egypt, for example. The primary institution in Egypt right now is the military. One of the things we learned about the Arab Spring, because there's a lot of information on how Egypt works, was the Egyptian military is doing things like making appliances. They are in business. So if you have a military that's actually cranking out consumer goods, they're actually running businesses, do you think they're not going to use their intelligence service to give themselves an edge? What about sovereign states that have their own investment funds? We have these sovereign wealth funds. Some of these states do not necessarily have the best human rights records in the world. So we think they draw the line at, they'll do torture, but they draw the line at cyber espionage because that's unethical. I don't know that that's happening, but it wouldn't surprise me. So you have to think outside of the normal espionage because a lot of the nation states are doing that. So APT is a geopolitical issue. Yes, of course, if you're in information security, the things we can and need to do to defend our organizations. As information security people, we have to get better at what we do. But because this is a geopolitical issue, we are seeing attention at the geopolitical scale. For example, here in the United States, we're starting to see, as we saw the congressional hearings, they're starting to name names. We have congressional people who are starting to name specific nation states. We saw the recent counterintelligence report that came out from the United States naming China and Russia. So this is also the sphere and where it belongs. Espionage is a political issue. It's a geopolitical issue. So not only do we as professionals have to defend our organizations, we also have to encourage our political class, depending on the nation states you're in, to put pressure on other nation states to knock this off. We can do all the defense we want, but certain nation states aren't going to stop until there's a change of government or they back off. So why should you care? The health of your business. How much is your confidential data worth to you? You spend all this time developing something and it gets stolen by a competitor. You've seen probably the pictures, and I really need to add a slide on this. Other people have done this, and I'm going to steal the concept, but some of the folks I've seen recently have done presentations on this. They'll show a picture of the new drone that they have, and they'll show a picture of our drone. Same thing. The Chinese stealth fighter looks remarkably like our F-22. So, this is one of the what can happen in the military sphere. Of course, it's going to happen in the private sphere. You may have some sort of great widget that you're creating. Well, some nation state may steal it, save them 4 or 5 years of development, and now they put it out in their industry, and maybe they do it cheaper because they have cheaper labor costs. That hurts your business. That hurts your business badly. It's not just your confidential data. They'll go after business practices. Not only is what you build interesting to them, how you do it. What are the margins on what you sell? Remember, some of these nation states, their economic, their industry is indivisible from their government, which means it's indivisible from their intelligence collection. Another reason, altruism. You may not have anything to do with defense technology, but these folks have limited resources just like you have limited resources. Now, nation states are a powerful thing. They have the power to print money. They have the power to levy taxes. That's an incredible amount of resources they have, but it's still finite. The more of us who work to increase our defenses so that these folks have to work harder and have to expend resources, the less chance, in my opinion, that they will have to grab military technology and potentially shoot down, and this is an FA-18 going off of an aircraft carrier, we have 2 aviators in there. Maybe you don't work on missile defense systems, but maybe because their intelligence service was tasked to steal your widget and you did such a great job defending them, maybe they had to spend resources that would have gone to grabbing a missile defense system that would have gone to knocking down 2 of our aviators. I don't know if we'll ever be able to prove that, but the more of us who make these folks expend the resources, the safer our warfighters will be. So what can you do about it? Panic! Right? When in trouble, when in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. That's what your first APT experience may feel like. Generally what happens in the first APT experience, in the Verizon They do the report every year. I forgot the statistic. I think it was something like, it was a high percentage of the cases of breaches that involved intellectual property and classified data went, unreported for years. So, once these folks get in there, they're very hard to detect. That's the whole point, is they get into your organization, they lay low and take your stuff. They don't want to make noise. So a lot of folks who their first APT experience, their first nation-state espionage experience is, it's Friday at 3 o'clock. It's always Friday in the afternoon. You get a call from, your friendly neighborhood law enforcement agent, FBI, who knows, and they say, hey, you got a problem. In some cases, they may say, hey, you got a problem, and, oh, by the way, here's some of your intellectual property. Oh, crap, you got an FBI agent showing up with your intellectual property. Generally, what happens is you look around, you'll have your internal team start looking around, you start seeing problems. You'll place a phone call to somebody like Harlan or Mandiant or TrustWave or any other organizations that are very good at this. They'll send a couple folks out very quickly. And a week or two later, you realize you've been owned pretty badly, maybe for years on end. And you may have lost gigabytes or terabytes of data. So now you're not only trying to remediate from a large incident, but you're also trying to figure out what the damage was. What happens after that? Generally, the wallet opens up for about 6 months. You're going to have a blank check, only for a short amount of time, to make some changes. So you have to strike while the iron's hot. So the old way of thinking, and this is the reason why I do this presentation, what I'm about to tell you, basically you can ignore APT at this point, because everything I'm telling you at this point doesn't matter if it's a nation-state actor or anonymous or really sharp 16-year-old in Germany who wants to go after your email server or organized crime. Basically, an advanced actor is a problem, whether it's a nation-state. I don't care if they call it APT. And APT is, like I said, it's a pretty loaded term. I like the term advanced actors. I tend to use that because it's a broader term. But anyway, the old way of thinking is controls, right? When we were, a lot of us, well, older, I'm older, a lot of us who started information security were told, it was a control-based emphasis, which is you get your controls right, and you spend a little bit of money on incident response, and everything's fine. We ask questions, basically, how big should our walls be? Should we have a drawbridge? How big should our moat be? How deep should it be? Should we fill the moat with alligators, sharks, lawyers? What do we want to fill the moat with? Firewalls, this sort of thing. The controls don't work anymore. The key to success. This is Jet. I want to introduce you to Jet. Jet is a 2-year-old border collie. You will find no creature on earth more in the moment than Jet the border collie when he is chasing sheep. And this is the key to success. Yes, of course you have to get your controls right. I would never tell you that your controls aren't important. They are critically important. If you cannot get your basic information technology controls right, wow. Everything I'm going to tell you at this point doesn't matter. Prevent is so important. But we have to talk about detect and respond. The key to your security, and what I want you to think about when you think of security in the modern enterprise, it's not the castle, it's Jet. All right? You want your border collies chasing the APT, and the best, if I could ever figure this out, this would be awesome. The best graphic I'd ever do would be, if I could get a picture of Jet chasing sheep out of the castle, that would be the perfect thing. But you have to detect, respond, and remediate. Your controls aren't going to do that for you. You have to have incident response, folks. You have to have people inside your organization who are passionate about this. And most of you folks who are on this are already passionate about this. You love this. You go to work. The reason you got into digital forensics and incident response is you want to chase bad guys. So the key to an effective security program is, yes, of course, do your controls, but you have to have your border collies, people who are passionate about chasing these folks around. People are important, processes and tools for a good security incident response team, but it's the people. All the best tools in the world aren't going to matter. All the processes and the tools, and you have to have your processes down, aren't going to matter. You need people who are passionate about doing this, who live for doing this, and who are well-led, and that's one of the keys to fighting the threat. So it's not only prevent, but it's detect, respond, and remediate. As I talked about, the controls are important. Processes and tools are important, but processes and tools are to get the most out of your people. Your people need great tools to do the work, but the biggest problem I have, the thing just irks me, is we've got these vendors who, you'll see these white papers. They'll put these great white papers out. We'll have a pretty good definition of APT. hey, it's nation-state actor. They'll scare you with all the statistics. Then it'll say, the way you solve this is you buy our tool. It's like, yeah, your tool's fine, but the way you solve this is you have your border collies. It's all about people. The tools make the people better. Endpoints versus the perimeter. As somebody said, and I wish I knew who had said this, your firewalls are pointing in the wrong direction. They're attacking the hosts. The phishing emails. One of the reasons you know that you've done a good job in putting an end to an APT campaign, and that's the way you think about it too. You're never done. Once you've been targeted by a nation-state actor, they're always going to come after you, and it's just a matter of fighting campaigns. But one of the best indications that you're doing good, you'll see an uptick in phishing. You've kicked out a particular APT group where you made their lives miserable. One of the ways you know that you're getting success is you'll see your phishing stuff tick up because they want to try and get back in. You're doing a good job. The importance of visibility. You have to see what's going on in your network. There's keeping logs is really important now. Keeping logs in all sorts of different things for a long amount of time. This is a big data issue. That's why there's a lot of arguments about SIEM and what tools. And there's plenty of great tools out there, ArcSight, Splunk, whatever. But that's one of the things that get you visibility. And then the other thing to talk about is metrics. So how do you measure if your border collies are doing a good job? Well, one of the ways to do that is how long does it take for you to detect an incident? When you have an incident and you start doing an incident response, you're going to start, of course, you're doing a good job. One of the things that Harlan has been big about very early in his career, and he's spent a lot of time teaching us, is timeline. So you're going to be putting together a timeline, and we're not talking about just hosts. We're talking about an entire incident you're putting a timeline as. You'll get to that ground zero event. You'll have a pretty good idea when it happened. You'll also obviously know when you detected it. You want to reduce that space. You do not want, and this is how you measure victory, you have to change the way that you sell security to your management, your senior business management, change the definition of winning. When I first started in information security, it was like any sort of breach felt like a loss. Oh my God, we got breached, our controls failed. We suck. Your controls are going to get breached. An advanced actor will get past that. You need to redefine the winning. Winning is, hey, we got breached. We found them within 3 or 4 days. We only had to remediate a couple machines. We didn't lose any data. That's winning. You take your basket, you fill it up with Scooby snacks and dog treats. You go to the security operations center and you throw them at your border collies and go, oh, the guys did a good job. That's winning. If you can make a breach and just make it a small thing and get on it early, that's winning. If you have a breach where you lose your entire data center or an entire DMZ, or you didn't detect it for years on end, that's a loss. So how long does it take to detect a breach? How long does it take to remediate? Once you found it, how long does it take for you to basically kick the folks out? Threat-based security, I think everyone really is bought into that now. You can buy intelligence. You can use. It's important to do intelligence sharing. Depending on the industry sometimes you have industry organizations that do that. The Defense Industrial Base works very closely with the United States government doing intelligence sharing. The financial community has FS-ISAC and other organizations. They share information. But now you can buy good intelligence. You can go to places like Mandiant, and they will sell you basically intelligence. They sell you the indication of compromise, or the IOC's indication of compromise. So we're at a point now in the information security where there's no excuse for not getting good threat intelligence. You can do it. It's out there. You can buy it. And you have to share methods, share intelligence. Basically, we have to work together in all this. So it pays to be a winner. Prevent, detect, respond, remediate. Make sure you've got JET. Make sure you've got these passionate incident responders. Get your controls right. Make sure you've got your incident responders who are quickly going after the bad guys and doing everything they can to chase them out, and you will be a winner. There's no reason to panic. Even if you're going after even the most sophisticated nation-state actors, you can mount an effective defense. So questions. Anyway, credits, my APT Triad. Nancy Thornton, who actually gave me the border collie pictures, she allowed me to use the border collie pictures. I found them online, and she was very nice to give me permission to use it, and Getty Images, I bought the rights to use images for everything else. So if we do questions, I can scroll through. Let me see here. Corey Harrell, what do you think it will take to get public sector organizations to recognize security threats we're facing? They get owned. That seems to be the only thing that kind of wakes people up. Here's what I'm seeing. So I've been presenting to senior executives, and they are starting to get it. So many people have been owned that the folks that haven't been owned, or at least the smart ones, are starting to realize, oh crap, I don't want to go for that experience. I don't want to be the next Sony. I don't want to be the next RSA. So in some cases, getting owned will wake the organization that got owned up. I've seen people get owned and not do anything about it. So I'm seeing that there's so much attention now, and you get enough damage, people will sometimes wake up. Heartland, for example, payment systems is the classic example, right? They were PCI compliant. They got owned. Those poor guys got owned hard by Ukrainian hackers. They responded really well. Their CSO is now the CTO. They've not only implemented a pretty robust incident response function, they've also looked at their whole business model when it comes to payment card information to figure out, okay, not only do we need to defend ourselves, but if you're the mom and pop on the street, we want to figure out a way where when credit card information comes into your organization, the mom and pop bodega on the street, it just, from the time it leaves and the time it goes to us, it's all encrypted. So even if you do knock over that grocery store, because they're not going to have incident responders, it's not going to matter. So ROI on border collies. How do you show ROI? I am increasingly less enamored with ROI as I am making the case, and this isn't the questions, this actually gets into it. So the two questions I tend to get is, hey, gosh, we're not a defense contractor. We make, hamburgers. Why should we care? Well, we've talked about business processes and all that, and people get that, which is good. The next thing we get is, gosh, how do I sell this to my business? One of the ways that you sell it to the business is one of the ways you sell e-discovery, which is prevention. With e-discovery, you sell doing that properly because you don't want zillions of dollars of sanctions. Cost avoidance is a good idea because you can show, look, somebody got knocked over, they had to spend this amount of money. Heartland got knocked over. This is what happened to their stock price, for a year. So I really tend to like cost avoidance, and that seems, at least in the conversations that I've had with senior executives, that seems to be getting through. Let's see, trying to read through. Any more questions?
There was one earlier.
Yeah, Aaron Weiss, you're right. Sell APT for what it is, insurance. Yeah. What do you think oh, this is a good one for Doug Brush. What do you think current initiatives like SEC proposal for breach notification will help? It depends. I hope it does. But my fear with the SEC notifications is they'll all be so generic and bland that everyone will just kind of put the generic boilerplate in there saying, yeah, we're at risk, or yeah, we got owned. So it depends on how much specificity is in there. So we'll see. I'm cautiously optimistic. A lot of things that seem to be helping are the breach notifications for like PCI data. I think most states have that now, or if you have credit card data get knocked over, you have to reveal that. So I think we're at a point where keeping things quiet is going to be legally hard to do and impermissible, but we'll see.